The wedding hall fell silent as the groom abandoned his bride mid-vow and walked straight toward a man in the back row, a quiet single father no one had bothered to notice. "Mr. Vale!" The name echoed like a gunshot. Reed Vale? Heads turned. Whispers erupted. The woman beside him, Lana, the bride's sister, his cafe companion of 6 months, stared at him with eyes that moved from confusion to recognition to something that looked like betrayal. In that moment, Ethan Cole's carefully constructed invisibility shattered, and the life he'd built in silence crumbled under the weight of a truth he'd hidden too well. If you're intrigued by stories of hidden identity, second chances, and the price of honesty, stay with me until the end. And please, comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The bookstore cafe on Maple Street had exactly 17 tables, 3 overstuffed armchairs, and a chronic problem with its espresso machine that made it hiss like an angry cat every 4th drink. Ethan Cole had counted the tables during his first visit 8 months ago, noted the machine's temperament by week 2, and claimed the corner table by the window as his territory by week 3. It was the kind of place that smelled like old paper and cinnamon, where the lighting was warm enough to read by but dim enough to disappear into, and where the staff had stopped asking his name after the 5th visit because they'd already memorized his order. Black coffee. Nothing else. Always black coffee. Ethan appreciated the predictability. At 42, he'd learned that predictability wasn't boring, it was survival. Predictability meant his 7-year-old daughter Maya knew exactly when he'd pick her up from school. It meant his freelance editing clients received their manuscripts precisely when promised. It meant his life, small and deliberate as it was, remained his own. He'd been living in Riverside for 14 months, and in that time he'd perfected the art of being nobody in particular. He wore clothes from department store clearance racks. He drove a 12-year-old sedan with a dent in the passenger door that he had never bothered fixing. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment above a hardware store, where the rent was reasonable and the landlord didn't ask questions. When people asked what he did, he said editing work, with enough vague pleasantness that they rarely pressed further. It was a life built on intention, not accident, every choice deliberate, every detail controlled. "Is this seat taken?" Ethan looked up from his laptop to find a woman standing beside the empty chair across from him. She was maybe 35 with dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail and eyes that looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. She wore business casual, gray slacks, white blouse, minimal jewelry, like someone who'd learned to dress for success but had stopped caring whether success dressed back. "It's all yours," Ethan said, gesturing to the chair. She set her coffee down, some complicated vanilla thing with foam art that would be gone in 3 sips, and pulled out her own laptop. For the next 90 minutes, they existed in the same space without interaction beyond the occasional shift of chairs or apologetic reach for the sugar caddy. When Ethan packed up to leave, she was still typing, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the mechanical precision of someone meeting a deadline they resented. He saw her again 2 days later. Same table, same tired eyes, same vanilla coffee that she barely tasted. This time, when he sat down, she glanced up and offered a small nod of recognition, the kind strangers exchange when they've shared space enough times to acknowledge the pattern without naming it. By the 3rd week, they'd established an unspoken routine. Tuesdays and Fridays, late afternoon. She arrived first, claimed the table, ordered her unnecessarily complicated coffee. He arrived 15 minutes later with his black coffee and laptop. They worked in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing the outlet under the table when both their batteries ran low. It was week 5 when she finally spoke beyond pleasantries. "Do you think silence is underrated or overrated?" Ethan looked up from the manuscript he was editing, a thriller with too many adjectives and not enough actual thrills. She was watching him with genuine curiosity, her laptop closed, her coffee forgotten. "In what context?" he asked. "In general. In life. In—" She gestured vaguely at the space between them. "Whatever this is." This? 2 strangers who've been sharing a table for over a month without asking each other's names. Ethan considered this. "I think silence is underrated because most people are afraid of it. They fill it with noise because quiet makes them confront what they're actually thinking." She smiled, A real smile, not the customer service version. That's either very wise or very sad. Can it be both? I suppose it can. She extended her hand across the table. Lena. Ethan. Her handshake was firm, professional, the grip of someone who'd spent years proving they belonged in rooms that didn't want them. Do you come here to hide or to think? Lena asked. Is there a difference? I think so. Hiding is passive. Thinking is active. Hiding is running away from something. Thinking is running toward understanding it. Ethan closed his laptop. This conversation, unexpected as it was, felt more important than fixing another author's comma splices. What about you? Are you hiding or thinking? Lena looked down at her coffee, now cold and uninviting. I thought I was thinking, but lately I suspect I've just gotten very good at hiding in plain sight. From what? Expectations, family, the weight of other people's ambitions for my life. She laughed, but it was hollow. That sounds dramatic, doesn't it? It sounds honest. They talked until the cafe staff started stacking chairs on tables, the universal signal that closing time had arrived, whether customers were ready or not. They talked about nothing important. Favorite books? Opinions on whether the cafe's cinnamon rolls were worth the calories. Lena said yes. Ethan remained skeptical. The particular species of person who talked loudly on their phone in quiet spaces. They talked around the edges of their actual lives, sharing enough to build connection without risking exposure. When they finally left, walking out into the cool autumn evening, Ethan realized he'd enjoyed the conversation more than he'd enjoyed any social interaction in over a year. There was something about Lena's particular brand of weariness that matched his own. Not depression, not resignation, but the specific exhaustion of people who'd chosen to step away from lives that demanded too much. Same time Friday? Lena asked as they paused on the sidewalk where their paths would diverge. I'll be here. She smiled and walked away, and Ethan stood there for a moment longer than necessary, watching her go and wondering what exactly he'd just agreed to. The next Friday, Lena arrived with her laptop but didn't open it. Instead, she had a book, a battered paperback copy of something literary and depressing that Ethan vaguely remembered being assigned in college. No work today? He asked as he settled into his usual chair. I decided to give myself permission to not be productive for one afternoon. She set the book on the table. Turns out giving yourself permission is harder than just doing the work. What do you do? For work, I mean. Corporate strategy consulting. I help companies figure out why they're failing and then watch them ignore my advice. She said it without bitterness, just factual observation. You? Freelance editing. I help writers figure out why their books aren't working and then fix what I can. Do they listen better than my clients? Sometimes, but usually only after I've proven I'm right. Lena laughed, and the sound was warm enough that the barista looked over from behind the counter, surprised. That's the problem with being right, isn't it? People resent you for it even when they need you to be. They fell into conversation as easily as they had the week before, trading observations about work and life with the kind of honesty that's only possible between people who owe each other nothing. Ethan told her about a manuscript he was editing where the detective solved crimes using interpretive dance. Lena told him about a CEO who'd hired her to fix his company culture but refused to acknowledge that he was the primary source of toxicity. Why do you stay? Ethan asked. If it's that frustrating? Lena was quiet for a long moment. Because walking away feels like admitting defeat. Because my family expects me to succeed at this particular version of success. Because... She stopped, shook her head. I don't know anymore. Inertia, maybe? It's easier to keep going than to stop and ask whether you're going in the right direction. Ethan understood that more than he wanted to admit. What about you? Lena asked. Why editing? Why freelance? Flexibility. I have a daughter, Maya. She's 7. This way I can work around her schedule, be there when she needs me. That's... Lena paused, choosing words carefully. That's really beautiful, actually. How many men would restructure their entire career around their kids' needs? Any decent father would. You'd be surprised how rare decency is. They talked until closing again, and when they parted on the sidewalk, Ethan noticed that Lena looked less tired than usual. The weariness was still there, would probably always be there, but underneath it was something that might have been contentment. The weeks accumulated into months. Tuesday and Friday became fixed points in both their calendars. The appointments that didn't get moved, the commitments that superseded other obligations. They learned each other's coffee orders, reading habits, work frustrations. Ethan discovered that Lena had a sister getting married in 3 months, that she'd been engaged once herself, but had ended it when she realized she was marrying a resume rather than a person. That she liked old movies and hated the theater because it felt like work pretending to be leisure. Lena learned that Ethan's daughter loved dinosaurs and chapter books, that he'd been a single parent since Maya was 2, that he'd had a career before editing but didn't like talking about it. She learned to recognize when he was editing something he actually enjoyed versus when he was just paying bills. His posture changed, his coffee consumption decreased, sometimes he smiled at his screen. What they never exchanged were last names, specific addresses, or the kind of details that would make them findable outside the careful boundaries of this bookstore cafe. It was an unspoken agreement, this mutual anonymity. They could be honest here precisely because they weren't fully known. They could be themselves because those selves existed only in this specific space, untethered from the weight of history or expectation. In early November, Lena arrived looking different. Not bad different. Actually, she looked better than Ethan had ever seen her. She wore a dark green dress instead of her usual business casual, and her hair was down, and she'd clearly made an effort that suggested this wasn't just another Friday afternoon of comfortable companionship. "Big meeting?" Ethan asked as she sat down. "Wedding dress fitting, for my sister." She said it like an apology. "How's that going?" "The dress is beautiful. The wedding is going to be spectacular. My sister is marrying exactly the kind of man my parents hoped she would. Successful, ambitious, from the right kind of family." Lena stirred her coffee unnecessarily. "I'm supposed to be happy about it." "But you're not." "I'm happy for her. I'm just—" She stopped, frustrated with her own inability to articulate what she felt. "Do you ever feel like you're watching your life happen to someone who looks like you but isn't actually you?" Ethan set down the manuscript he'd been only half reading. "Every day for about 3 years." "What changed?" "I stopped watching. I made different choices." He didn't elaborate, and Lena didn't push. "The wedding is in February," Lena said after a long silence. "Valentine's Day weekend, because my sister has always been aggressively romantic. It's going to be 200 people, most of whom I barely know, all of them ready to ask me when I'm going to settle down and why I'm still single at my age. You don't owe them explanations." "I know, but try explaining that to my mother." Lena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She's already started the campaign." "Lena, you can't come alone." "Lena, what will people think?" "Lena, I've invited the Richardsons and their son is recently divorced." "Sounds miserable." "It really does." Lena looked at him then, direct and unflinching. "Would you, and you can absolutely say no to this, would you consider coming with me? As a buffer? As, I don't know, moral support, someone who isn't going to spend the entire night trying to fix me?" Ethan should have said no. Every instinct honed over the past 14 months of careful invisibility screamed that this was exactly the kind of entanglement he'd moved to Riverside to avoid. Going to Lena's sister's wedding meant meeting her family. Meeting her family meant last names and questions and the potential unraveling of the comfortable anonymity they'd built. But Lena was looking at him with something that might have been hope, and Ethan had learned that hope was a fragile thing that deserved protection. "Okay," he heard himself say. "Yes, I'll go." The relief on Lena's face was immediate and overwhelming. "Really? You'd do that?" "You'd do the same for me." "I absolutely would, but I'm not sure I'd be brave enough to ask." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about anything except the wedding, both of them carefully avoiding the acknowledgement that something had shifted in their carefully maintained friendship. By agreeing to step outside their cafe's sanctuary, Ethan had cracked open a door he'd kept firmly closed for more than a year. When he got home that night, Maya was at the kitchen table working on a school project about community helpers. She looked up as he walked in, her face smeared with marker and entirely too pleased with herself. "Daddy, what do you help the community with?" Ethan hung up his coat and joined her at the table. surveying the chaos of construction paper and glue sticks. I help writers make their stories better. That's boring. Emma's dad is a firefighter. Carlos's mom is a doctor. You just read stuff. Reading stuff is important too. Maya considered this with the intense seriousness only 7-year-olds could muster when evaluating their parents' worth. I guess, but it would be cooler if you saved people. Maybe I do save people, just with words instead of fire trucks. That's still boring. She went back to her project, the matter settled in her mind. Mrs. Patterson says we should be proud of our families. I told her I was proud of you even though you just read stuff. Ethan smiled and ruffled her hair, which she tolerated for exactly 3 seconds before squirming away. Thanks, kiddo. Later, after Maya was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Ethan stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the street below. The hardware store was closed, the sidewalks empty, the neighborhood settled into its usual Friday night stillness. This was the life he'd chosen, small, contained, safe. A life where he was just Ethan Cole, freelance editor and single father, a man of no particular importance to anyone except his daughter, and maybe, now, to a woman who knew his coffee order but not his last name. Going to that wedding was a risk. But then again, the biggest risk was living so carefully that you forgot how to live at all. December arrived with cold rain and holiday decorations that appeared overnight like an aggressive retail ambush. The bookstore cafe added peppermint mochas to the menu and played instrumental versions of Christmas songs that made even atheists nostalgic. Ethan and Lena maintained their Tuesday and Friday tradition, but now their conversations included wedding planning updates delivered with varying degrees of exasperation. My mother has opinions about your suit, Lena announced one Tuesday, setting down her coffee with enough force to slosh it slightly. She doesn't know me. How does she have opinions about my suit? She's extrapolating based on the fact that you exist and will be attending her daughter's wedding. She's suggested, and I'm quoting here, something appropriate for the venue, which means she thinks you're going to show up in jeans. I own a suit. A good suit? Ethan thought about the Tom Ford suit hanging in the back of his closet, still in its garment bag, unworn for over a year. Define good. Will my mother look at it and make that face she makes when she's disappointed but too polite to say so directly? Probably not. Then it's fine. Wear whatever you want. Lena stopped, frustrated. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked you to do this. It's not fair to drag you into my family drama. Lena, I said yes. That means I'm choosing to be dragged. Still, you should know what you're getting into. My family they're complicated. They have expectations about success and status and who belongs in their world. My sister's fiancé is exactly what they wanted. Ivy League degree, family money, corner office before 30. She paused, searching for words. He's perfectly acceptable. You don't like him. I don't dislike him, I just don't know him. He's all polish and no depth. But my sister loves him, or loves the idea of him, which might be the same thing. What do they know about me? Ethan asked. That you're my friend, that you're coming as my +1, that you're... Lena hesitated, then committed to honesty. That you're a suitable buffer against their matchmaking efforts. So they think I'm your boyfriend. I didn't correct that assumption, no. Ethan should have asked more questions, should have established clearer boundaries about what this arrangement meant and what it didn't. But Lena looked so tired again, that bone-deep exhaustion of people who spent their lives managing other people's expectations, and Ethan recognized that exhaustion because he'd worn it himself for years. It's fine, he said. We'll survive one evening. One evening, a rehearsal dinner, and probably brunch the next day. My mother doesn't do anything by half measures. Then we'll survive one weekend. Lena reached across the table and squeezed his hand, brief and grateful. Thank you, really. The touch lasted maybe 3 seconds, but Ethan felt it the rest of the afternoon. The warmth of it, the trust in it, the way it suggested their friendship had become something more complicated than convenient companionship. January came, and with it the creeping awareness that the wedding was approaching with inevitable momentum. Lena seemed more stressed with each passing week, showing up to the cafe with tension in her shoulders and dark circles under her eyes that even good concealer couldn't quite hide. "My sister wants to do wedding party photos at sunrise," she announced one Friday. "Sunrise in February, she says it's for the lighting." "That's dedication. That's insanity." Lena slumped in her chair. "I love her. I do. But I don't understand how we grew up in the same house and turned out so completely different. She embraced everything our parents wanted, the right schools, the right career, the right marriage. And I just couldn't. Or wouldn't. I'm still not sure which." "Does it matter?" "Probably not. But it would be nice to know whether I'm brave or just stubborn." "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Ethan said. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the cafe bustling around them with the usual Friday afternoon crowd. Students with laptops and existential dread about upcoming exams. Retirees with paperbacks and too much time. Young parents with strollers and exhausted relief that someone else was making their coffee. "Can I ask you something?" Lena said finally. "And you can tell me it's none of my business." "Okay." "What did you do? Before editing? Before—" She gestured vaguely at him, at the laptop, at the careful ordinariness of his current life. Ethan had known this question would come eventually, had prepared for it even. "I worked in finance, investment management." "And you quit?" "I walked away." "Why?" "Because the life that came with it wasn't worth the paycheck. Because I wanted to actually raise my daughter, not just fund her childhood from a distance. Because—" He stopped, aware he was saying too much. "Because I could. Not everyone gets that choice, but I did, and I took it." Lena studied him with those sharp, tired eyes that missed very little. "You're hiding from something." "From a lot of things. Does it work? The hiding?" "Most days." Ethan met her gaze. "You're hiding too." "I know, but I don't think I'm very good at it." "You're better than you think." They left it there, that shared acknowledgement of their mutual retreat from lives neither of them wanted to examine too closely. When they parted that evening, standing on the sidewalk in the cold January air, Ethan almost asked her what would happen after the wedding. Would they return to their Tuesday and Friday routine? Would the introduction to her family change the careful balance they'd maintained? Would knowing each other's last names and real context destroy the thing they'd built? But he didn't ask, because some questions were better left unspoken until you were ready for the answers. The wedding was 3 weeks away, and Ethan Cole was walking straight toward the exposure he'd spent 14 months avoiding. He told himself it would be fine, that one weekend wouldn't unravel everything he'd carefully constructed. He was very good at lying to himself, but sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, he wondered if the real lie was pretending he could hide forever, or pretending that being seen would be the disaster he'd convinced himself it would be. The invitation arrived in Ethan's mailbox on a Tuesday, nestled between a utility bill and a coupon for an oil change he didn't need. Heavy cardstock, cream-colored, with embossed lettering that whispered money in the particular way expensive things always did. He stood in his apartment hallway holding it, reading his own name written in calligraphy that had probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget. Mr. Ethan Cole and guest, the Harrington Castellanos wedding, the Riverside Grand Hotel. Black tie optional. Maya appeared at his elbow, standing on tiptoe to see what he was holding. "Is that a fancy letter?" "It's a wedding invitation." "Whose wedding?" "A friend's sister." Maya wrinkled her nose in the way she did when evaluating whether something was worth her attention. "Do I have to go?" "No, kiddo. Just me." "Good. Weddings are boring. Emma went to one and said they made her sit still for 1,000,000 hours, and the only good part was cake. She lost interest immediately and wandered back to the living room where she'd been building an elaborate dinosaur habitat out of couch cushions and excessive optimism. Ethan stayed in the hallway, turning the invitation over in his hands. The Riverside Grand Hotel wasn't just nice. It was the kind of place that hosted governors and visiting dignitaries, that appeared in lifestyle magazines with headlines about luxury and elegance, the kind of place that did background checks on valets. He pulled out his phone and texted Lena. "Got the invitation, the Riverside Grand?" Her reply came 30 seconds later. "I know, I'm sorry, my mother insisted on making a statement." What kind of statement requires a hotel that charges $50 for parking? The kind that says the Harrington family has arrived and everyone should be very impressed. Ethan smiled despite himself. Are you impressed? I'm exhausted. There's a difference. That Friday at the cafe, Lena looked worse than he'd ever seen her. Not physically unwell, but worn down in a way that suggested she'd been fighting battles on multiple fronts and losing most of them. My mother wants to meet you, she said without preamble, setting down her coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. Okay. No, you don't understand. She doesn't just want to meet you. She wants to vet you. She's already asked me what you do, where you went to school, what your family background is. I gave her the basics, editing, freelance, single father, and she made this sound. This very specific sound that means she's disappointed but will attempt to be gracious about it. I've survived worse than maternal disappointment. Have you? Have you really? Lena pressed her fingers against her temples. Because my mother has made an art form out of polite devastation. She won't say anything directly mean. She'll just ask very pointed questions about your prospects and your 5-year plan, and whether you think stability is important in a relationship, all while smiling like she's doing you a favor by acknowledging your existence. Ethan reached across the table and gently pulled Lena's hands away from her face. Look at me. She did, reluctant. I agreed to go to this wedding. That means I'm agreeing to whatever comes with it. Your mother's questions, your family's judgment, all of it. You don't have to protect me from them. But I want to, Lena said quietly. This has been the only place where I haven't had to perform, where I could just exist without justifying my existence. And now I'm dragging you into the exact environment I come here to escape from. Then we'll escape from it together. We'll survive the weekend, smile for the photos, and then we'll come back here and drink overpriced coffee and complain about it for weeks. Lena laughed, watery but genuine. You make it sound simple. It is simple. It's just not easy. The pre-wedding dinner was scheduled for the Friday before Valentine's Day at a restaurant that didn't list prices on its menu because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford to be there. Lena had warned him it would be family only, her parents, her sister, and the groom, both sets of grandparents if they were feeling well enough, and various aunts and uncles who'd flown in for the occasion. You don't have to come to this one, Lena had said. The invitation was just for the wedding itself. But Ethan had heard the hope underneath her words, the unspoken plea for a friendly face in a room full of expectations, so he'd said yes to this too. He stood in front of his closet the night before, looking at the Tom Ford suit he hadn't touched in 14 months. Charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the kind of suit that announced you belonged in boardrooms and first-class lounges. He'd bought it for a shareholder meeting that felt like a lifetime ago, back when Reed Vale's wardrobe budget exceeded most people's annual salaries. Maya wandered into his room, already in her pajamas, her hair wet from the bath. Why are you staring at clothes? Trying to decide what to wear tomorrow. That one's nice. She pointed at the Tom Ford. It looks expensive. How do you know what expensive looks like? Emma's dad wears suits like that. He works at a bank, and Emma says he's very important. She said it with the absolute conviction of second-grade social hierarchy. Are you important? Ethan pulled the suit out and laid it on the bed. Not anymore. Were you important before? Some people thought so. But not you? He looked down at his daughter, this small person who'd changed everything about his life in ways he was still discovering. I think being a good dad is more important than being important. Maya considered this with her characteristic seriousness. That doesn't make sense, but okay. She hugged him quickly, fierce and brief, then disappeared to her room to read in bed past her bedtime like she did every night when she thought he wasn't paying attention. The next evening, Ethan dropped Maya at his neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Chen, a retired teacher who'd appointed herself as their unofficial grandmother and who always had fresh cookies and infinite patience. Then he drove across town to Lena's address, which she'd finally given him that morning via text, along with the message, "Warning, my apartment is very boring." She lived in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel and aggressive minimalism. The kind of place that looked impressive but felt empty, designed for people who were too busy to actually live in their homes. Lena answered the door in a black dress that was elegant without being showy, her hair styled in a way that suggested professional help, her makeup perfect and entirely wrong for her face. You look terrified, Ethan said. I am terrified. She grabbed her coat and purse. Let's go before I lose my nerve entirely. In the car, Lena ran through the family roster like a general briefing troops before battle. My father is Richard Harrington. He'll seem warm, but he's evaluating you constantly. My mother is Catherine, and we've already discussed her particular talents. My sister is Victoria, Tori, and she's actually lovely when she's not stressed about wedding details. The groom is Marcus Castellanos. He works in private equity, Harvard MBA. Very polished, very perfect, Ethan offered. I was going to say manufactured, but perfect works too. Lena twisted her hands in her lap. His parents will be there, Victor and Patricia. Old money, very concerned with lineage and legacy. They'll ask about your background. What should I tell them? The truth. You're a freelance editor, single father, you value your daughter over your career. It's all perfectly respectable. But not impressive. Not to them? No. Lena looked out the window. I'm sorry. I know I keep saying that, but I am. You shouldn't have to justify your life choices to strangers. Lena, I walked away from a life where I had to justify my choices to people who thought they owned me because they'd invested in my company. Your family can't be worse than hostile shareholders. She looked at him then, really looked, and Ethan saw the question forming before she asked it. What company? He'd known this was coming, had prepared for it, but actually saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. It doesn't matter. That's not who I am anymore. The restaurant was all white tablecloths and hushed conversations, the kind of place where the waitstaff moved like dancers, and the wine list required translation. The Harrington family had claimed a private room in the back, and Ethan could hear the laughter before they even reached the door, the particular sound of wealthy people enjoying themselves, confident and careless. Lena grabbed his hand just before they walked in. Her palm was cold, her grip tight enough to hurt. Last chance to run. We're doing this together, remember? She squeezed his hand once more, then released it and pushed open the door. The room fell silent in that way rooms do when something unexpected enters them. Ethan felt a dozen pairs of eyes assess and dismiss him in approximately 3 seconds. The calculation of people who'd spent their lives determining who mattered and who didn't based on clothes and posture and the particular shine of someone's shoes. Lena! A woman who could only be her mother rose from the head of the table, elegant and severe in the way of women who'd weaponized their own disappointment. We were beginning to worry you'd gotten lost. Sorry, Mother. Traffic. Lena's voice had changed, gone formal and careful. This is Ethan Cole. Ethan, my mother, Catherine Harrington. Catherine extended her hand and Ethan shook it, feeling her eyes catalog every detail of his appearance. Mr. Cole, how lovely that you could join us. Lena mentioned you're in publishing. Editing, actually, freelance. How interesting. The word interesting delivered in a tone that meant exactly the opposite. And you're a single father, Lena mentioned. I am. That must be quite challenging, balancing work and childcare. We manage. Lena's father appeared then, tall and silver-haired and radiating the kind of confident authority that came from never being told no. Richard Harrington. Pleasure to meet you, Ethan. His handshake was firm, competitive, the grip of a man who turned every interaction into a test. Lena's told us you two met at a coffee shop? A bookstore cafe, yes, sir. How modern. In my day, we met people at proper social functions. But I suppose times change. Richard clapped him on the shoulder with enough force to suggest dominance disguised as friendliness. Come, sit. You're next to Lena, naturally. The introductions continued in a blur of names and faces that Ethan cataloged carefully. Victoria, the bride-to-be, was softer than Lena, but with the same tired eyes, the same sense of carrying weight she hadn't asked for. Marcus Castellanos was exactly as advertised. Polished, charming, perfectly manufactured. His parents were old money in its purest form, every word and gesture calibrated to remind everyone of their position in the social hierarchy. The meal was exquisite and endless. 7 courses, each more elaborate than the last, each delivered with explanation from waitstaff who'd clearly rehearsed their presentations. Ethan watched Lena navigate her family with practiced precision, answering questions with just enough detail to satisfy without revealing, laughing at her father's jokes, complimenting her mother's choice of venue. It was a performance, and she was exhausted by it. "So, Ethan," Victor Castellano said during the fourth course, his voice carrying that particular authority of men who expected to be heard. "Lena mentioned you're in editing. What sort of books do you work on?" "Whatever needs editing. Fiction, mostly. Some nonfiction. Academic papers occasionally." "Fascinating. And you make a living at this?" "Enough of one." "In this economy, that's quite an achievement for freelance work." Patricia Castellano smiled with too many teeth. "You must be very disciplined." "I'm practical. I work around my daughter's schedule, which means I work when I can and make it count." "A single father," Patricia said it like a diagnosis. "That's quite noble of you, though I imagine it limits your professional advancement." "I'm not looking to advance. I'm looking to be present." There was a brief silence, the kind that follows when someone violates social norms by being too honest. Catherine recovered first, her smile sharp enough to cut. "How refreshing, though one does wonder about long-term stability. Children are expensive, and they only get more so as they age." Lena's hand found Ethan's under the table, her fingers lacing through his in warning or support or both. "Ethan is very stable, Mother. He's been freelancing for years." "Of course, dear. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise." Catherine's tone suggested she'd meant exactly that. "It's just that in our family we value, well, we believe in building something substantial. Security for future generations." But Richard leaned forward, his expression one of paternal concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The question is one of trajectory, son. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? 10? Ethan had heard this question 1,000 times in his previous life, had been the one asking it across boardroom tables. He knew what they wanted to hear: ambition, growth, expansion. He knew what answer would satisfy them. "In 5 years, I see myself doing exactly what I'm doing now," he said evenly. "Editing work I find meaningful, raising my daughter, living a life that's mine." The disappointment in the room was palpable, a collective deflation of people realizing he wasn't going to play their game. Marcus cleared his throat, attempting to redirect. "That's admirable, actually. Too many people chase success without stopping to ask whether they want what they're chasing." He smiled at Victoria. "Took me a long time to figure out what actually mattered." "And what matters?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. "Building something that lasts, contributing to something bigger than yourself. Legacy." Marcus's voice carried the rehearsed quality of someone who'd given this answer many times. "My firm manages assets for institutions, universities, hospitals, foundations. It's not just about returns. It's about impact." "How long have you been in private equity?" Ethan asked. 7 years. Started as an analyst at Silverton Partners right out of Harvard, worked my way up to associate, then partner. We recently closed a significant healthcare acquisition that's going to restructure how medical facilities operate across the Midwest. Ethan recognized the firm name, the deal structure, the particular language of someone who'd learned to make profit sound like altruism. He'd sat across the table from dozens of Marcus Castellanos throughout his career, had been pitched identical visions of impact that always somehow ended with wealth concentration and worker displacement. "That's the Mercy Health Systems acquisition?" Ethan asked. Marcus looked surprised. "You follow private equity news?" "I read, you're consolidating 12 regional hospitals into a centralized management structure." "Exactly. We're eliminating redundancy, streamlining operations, bringing efficiency to healthcare delivery. You're cutting staff and reducing services in rural areas to maximize returns for your investors." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Marcus's smile stayed fixed, but his eyes went cold. "That's a rather cynical interpretation." "It's an accurate one. I've seen the playbook. You'll close emergency rooms in low-income areas, reduce nursing staff to minimum safe levels, negotiate down supply costs until quality suffers, then flip the portfolio in 3 to 5 years for double your investment." "Ethan," Lena's voice was quiet, warning, but he couldn't stop, because he'd spent too many years watching people like Marcus dress up devastation in the language of progress. "How many jobs will you eliminate in year 1? "We're not eliminating jobs. We're restructuring for efficiency." "How many?" Marcus set down his fork with deliberate care. Restructuring always involves difficult decisions, but the long-term health of these institutions requires short-term sacrifice. The institutions will be fine. It's the people who work there and the communities they serve who will pay the price. Ethan kept his voice level, factual. But I'm sure your returns will be impressive. Victor Castellanos intervened, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to ending conversations. Young man, you seem to have strong opinions about an industry you claim only passing familiarity with. I have strong opinions about the human cost of financial engineering. How quaint. Patricia's smile was venomous. Though perhaps if you'd been more successful in your own career, you'd understand that progress requires uncomfortable choices. The insult hung in the air, elegant and devastating. Ethan felt Lena tense beside him, felt her preparing to defend him, and he squeezed her hand to stop her because he didn't need defending, and this wasn't her battle. You're absolutely right, he said quietly. I made choices that prioritize different values. I'm comfortable with those choices. Catherine seized the moment to redirect the conversation towards safer territory, wedding details, seating charts, the weather forecast for Valentine's Day weekend. The rest of the dinner passed in polite tension, everyone carefully avoiding topics that might lead back to uncomfortable honesty. When they finally escaped to the parking lot, Lena turned to him with eyes that were furious and grateful and exhausted all at once. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both. You didn't have to defend your choices to them. You don't owe them anything. I know, but I wasn't going to let them pretend that what Marcus does is noble when it's just predatory capitalism in expensive suits. Lena laughed, slightly hysterical. My mother is going to call me tomorrow and suggest very strongly that I reconsider my choice of companion. Will you? No. She said it with absolute certainty. You were the only real person in that room. Everyone else was performing, including me. You just existed. Honestly, it was terrifying and wonderful. They stood in the cold February night, breath visible in the air between them, and Ethan realized that something fundamental had shifted. They weren't just cafe companions anymore, weren't just two people hiding in the same comfortable space. They'd stepped into each other's actual lives, messy and complicated as those lives were. I should tell you something, Ethan said. Before we go any further with this, before the wedding. Okay. The life I walked away from, it wasn't just finance. I wasn't just working in investment management. He stopped, the words harder than he'd expected. I ran a firm, a significant firm. I had a reputation. I had the kind of success your family values, and I gave it all up because it was destroying me. Lena was very still. What was the firm called? Vale Capital Management. He watched her process this, saw the moment recognition hit. Vale Capital Management had been one of the most successful boutique investment firms on the East Coast before Ethan dissolved it. They'd specialized in turning around failing companies, restructuring them, making them profitable again. He'd been profiled in financial magazines, invited to speak at conferences, courted by larger firms wanting to acquire his expertise, and he'd walked away from all of it when Maya's mother died, and he'd realized he was raising his daughter through nannies and weekend phone calls. You're Reed Vale, Lena said quietly. That's your real name. Reed Vale. That's the name I used professionally, yes. Ethan is my middle name. Cole is complicated. But yes, I was Reed Vale. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to be him anymore. Because every time someone knew who I was, they stopped seeing me and started seeing potential, investment opportunities, networking connections, a resource to be leveraged. He met her eyes. With you, I gotta just be Ethan. Someone who drank black coffee and edited manuscripts and had opinions about cinnamon rolls. I didn't want to lose that. Lena processed this for a long moment. That's why you understood exactly what Marcus was doing. Because you used to do the same thing. I did similar things, yes. I restructured companies. I maximized returns. I told myself it was about saving businesses, but mostly it was about making money for people who already had too much of it. The admission tasted like failure. I was good at it, really good, and it hollowed me out. So you stopped. So I stopped. I liquidated the firm, paid out my investors, set up trust funds for my employees, and disappeared. Moved to Riverside, became a freelance editor, tried to figure out how to be a person instead of a portfolio. Does anyone here know? No one. I've been very careful. Different name, different life, different everything. Lena leaned against her car, her expression unreadable. Tomorrow my family is going to dissect you over brunch. They're going to make assumptions about who you are and what you're worth based on the fact that you're a freelance editor with a daughter and no apparent ambition. I know. And you're going to let them. I am. Why? You could shut them up in 30 seconds. Tell them who you really are, what you accomplished, how much you're actually worth. My mother would immediately change her tune. So would Marcus's parents. Ethan shook his head. Because that's not who I want to be anymore. Because their respect shouldn't depend on my bank account or my resume. Because... He stopped, trying to find words for something he'd barely articulated to himself. Because I need to know that the people in my life value me for who I am, not what I can do for them. And if your family can't respect Ethan Cole, freelance editor and single father, then they definitely don't respect me. They're going to judge you. They're already judging me. At least this way I get to maintain some dignity. Lena was quiet for so long that Ethan thought maybe he'd made a terrible mistake, that the revelation of his past had broken whatever fragile trust they'd built. But then she smiled, small and genuine and entirely exhausted. You're either the most principled person I've ever met or the most self-sabotaging. Can it be both? With you, it probably is. She pushed off from the car. For what it's worth, I prefer Ethan Cole to Reed Vale, the person who brings his daughter to bookstores instead of the person who restructures companies for profit. Even though one of them would be more impressive to your family. Especially because of that. She moved closer, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes and the determination under it. I'm done performing for them, Ethan. Done pretending that their version of success is the only one that matters. If you can walk away from everything you built to live a life that's actually yours, then maybe I can too. They stood there in the parking lot, the February cold seeping through their expensive clothes, and made a silent pact to stop hiding from themselves, even if it meant being exposed to everyone else. The wedding was 36 hours away, and Ethan had just guaranteed that when his secret inevitably came out, it would detonate spectacularly. But standing there with Lena, watching her breathe easier than she had all night, he thought maybe the explosion would be worth it. Valentine's Day arrived with the kind of perfect weather that felt like a personal insult to anyone having a bad day. Clear skies, unseasonable warmth, the sort of afternoon that made photographers weep with gratitude and anxious wedding guests sweat through their formal wear. Ethan stood in his apartment bathroom at 2 p.m, adjusting his tie for the 5th time and trying to ignore the way his hands weren't quite steady. The Tom Ford suit fit perfectly because, of course, it did. He'd paid someone an obscene amount of money to ensure it would fit perfectly for the rest of his life. In the mirror, he looked like Reed Vale again, polished, successful. Exactly the kind of man who belonged at a Harrington family wedding. He hated it. Maya appeared in the doorway, still in her play clothes, despite Mrs. Chen arriving in 20 minutes to watch her for the evening. You look fancy. I feel ridiculous. You look like the dads on TV who have important jobs and never have time to play catch. She tilted her head, evaluating him with the brutal honesty of 7-year-olds everywhere. Are you going to become one of those dads? Never. He crouched down to her level, ignoring the protest of his perfectly tailored pants. This is just a costume for one night. Tomorrow I'll be back to regular dad who has plenty of time for catch and dinosaur facts. Promise? Promise. She hugged him hard enough to wrinkle his jacket, and he held her close, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and the particular sweetness of childhood that he knew wouldn't last forever. This was why he'd walked away from Reed Vale. This exact moment, this exact person, this love that mattered more than any deal he'd ever closed. The drive to the Riverside Grand Hotel took 15 minutes, but felt like hours. Ethan's mind ran through scenarios, calculating risks the way he used to calculate investment portfolios. Best case. He survived the weekend anonymously, Lena's family continued to dismiss him as suitable but unimpressive, and life returned to normal on Monday. Worst case, Someone recognized him. His carefully constructed invisibility shattered, and he had to explain to Maya why strangers suddenly cared about her boring dad who just read stuff. The hotel was even more impressive in person than in photographs. Old money architecture meets new money excess, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers, and the kind of understated luxury that costs more than most people's houses. Valets in crisp uniforms directed traffic with choreographed precision. Guests in designer formal wear swept through the entrance like they were attending a movie premiere rather than a wedding. Ethan found Lena in the hotel lobby, pacing near a potted palm tree and looking like she might bolt for the exit any second. She wore a deep blue dress that should have been elegant but somehow made her look fragile instead, like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. "You came," she said when she saw him, and the relief in her voice was almost painful. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought you might have regained your sanity sometime between last night and now." She attempted a smile that didn't quite land. "My mother cornered me at breakfast this morning. She wanted to discuss your limited prospects and whether I was making appropriate choices for my future." "What did you tell her?" "That my choices were my own and she could focus on Victoria's wedding instead of my love life." Lena twisted her hands together. She responded by reminding me that I'm 35 and my window for advantageous matches is closing. Advantageous matches, like you're a chess piece. In her world, that's exactly what I am, what we all are. Strategic assets to be deployed for family advancement. She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears she'd never let fall. "I'm so tired, Ethan. Tired of being evaluated and found wanting. Tired of pretending that I want the things I'm supposed to want." He wanted to tell her to leave, to walk away from this wedding and this family and these expectations that were slowly crushing her. But he understood that walking away wasn't always simple, that sometimes you had to face the thing you were running from before you could truly be free of it. "Then don't pretend," he said quietly. "Not today. Not with me here. Let them see who you actually are. They won't like it. Then they won't like it. But at least you'll be honest." Before Lena could respond, a hotel coordinator appeared with a clipboard and an expression of professional urgency. "Miss Harrington, they're ready for family photos in the rose garden. Your mother asked me to find you." Lena took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and transformed back into the polished, controlled version of herself that her family required. "Of course. Ethan, the ceremony starts at 4. I'll meet you inside." He watched her follow the coordinator toward the garden, her posture perfect, and her stride confident, every inch of her screaming competence and composure. Only he knew that inside she was fracturing. The next hour passed in a blur of elegant chaos. Guests arrived in waves, each more impressive than the last. Ethan recognized faces from business news, society pages, political fundraisers, the kind of people who named buildings after themselves and expected gratitude for it. He'd spent years in rooms with people exactly like this, had been one of them, and he'd forgotten how exhausting it was to breathe air this rarefied. He found his assigned seat in the ceremony space, a ballroom transformed into something between a garden and a cathedral, with flowers that probably cost more than his car and lighting designed to make everyone look like they were starring in their own romantic movie. His name card placed him 3 rows back on the bride's side, next to an elderly woman who introduced herself as someone's great aunt and immediately fell asleep. The ceremony began with orchestral music that swelled with precisely calculated emotion. Victoria walked down the aisle on her father's arm, looking radiant and terrified in equal measure. Marcus waited at the altar, his expression one of practiced adoration that might have been genuine but felt rehearsed. The officiant spoke about love and commitment with the kind of generalized wisdom that applied to everyone and no one. Ethan found himself studying the guests instead of the couple. Lena sat in the front row between her parents, her back rigid and her hands folded in her lap. Catherine kept leaning over to whisper things that made Lena's shoulders tense further. Richard stared straight ahead with the fixed attention of someone determined to appear engaged while thinking about entirely different matters. The vows were traditional, beautiful, completely impersonal. Marcus promised to love and cherish Victoria with words that could have applied to any bride anywhere. Victoria promised to honor and support Marcus with a voice that trembled just slightly on the word obey, which the officiant had somehow convinced her to keep in the ceremony. If anyone objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional pause, the moment of dramatic tension that was supposed to be purely ceremonial. No one ever actually objected. That only happened in movies and disasters. Except Marcus wasn't looking at Victoria anymore. He was looking past her, past the officiant, past the elaborate floral arrangements, directly at Ethan. The recognition on Marcus's face was immediate and absolute. Color drained from his cheeks. His mouth opened slightly, closed, opened again. He took a step back from his bride as if she'd suddenly burst into flames. "Marcus?" Victoria's whisper carried in the perfect acoustics of the ballroom. "What's wrong?" But Marcus wasn't listening to her. He was walking, actually walking away from his bride at the altar, moving down the steps, through the front row where Catherine gasped and Richard half stood in confusion. He walked straight down the aisle toward Ethan with the single-minded focus of someone who'd forgotten where he was and what he was supposed to be doing. The room erupted in whispers that grew to murmurs that grew to outright conversation. 200 guests watching in real time as a groom abandoned his wedding ceremony to approach a man no one particularly cared about. Marcus stopped directly in front of Ethan's row. "Mr. Vale?" The name hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. "Reed Vale," Marcus said again, louder this time, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "Is that really you?" Ethan stood slowly, aware that every eye in the room was now on him, that his anonymity was dissolving in real time, that there was no possible way to salvage this situation. "Hello, Marcus." Marcus's laugh was slightly hysterical. "I don't believe it. Reed Vale. Here, at my wedding." He turned back to the altar where Victoria stood frozen, her bouquet trembling in her hands. "Corey, do you know who this is?" Victoria shook her head, mute with confusion and growing horror. "This is Reed Vale, the Reed Vale. He saved my company." Marcus looked back at Ethan with something approaching worship. 7 years ago, I was fresh out of Harvard and drowning. My first acquisition was failing. Investors were threatening to pull out. I was going to lose everything. And you... He gestured at Ethan like he was a miracle. "You personally restructured the entire deal. You spent 3 days teaching me how to actually analyze a business instead of just following formulas. You didn't have to do that. You were already legendary and I was nobody, but you took the time." The whispers in the crowd had evolved into full conversations. People pulling out phones, searching names, making connections. Catherine Harrington was standing now, staring at Ethan like he'd materialized out of thin air. Richard's expression had gone from confusion to calculation in approximately 10 seconds. Lena sat completely still, her face unreadable. "You said you'd retired," Marcus continued, oblivious to the destruction he was causing. "Dissolved your firm, walked away from everything. People have been trying to find you for years. Investment groups, private equity firms, everyone wants Reed Vale to come back and you've been, what, here in Riverside?" "I've been raising my daughter," Ethan said quietly, "living a different life." "But you're Reed Vale." Marcus said it like the name explained everything, like being Reed Vale meant his current life was impossible. "You revolutionized boutique investment management. The Vale method is still taught in business schools. You're a legend. I'm a freelance editor who drinks black coffee and picks his kid up from school on time." The words should have been simple, clear, definitive, but they landed in a room full of people who measured worth in deals closed and zeros in bank accounts, and the cognitive dissonance was almost visible. Victor Castellanos had made his way to the front of the crowd, his expression one of vindicated triumph. "Reed Vale, I knew I recognized something about you last night. The way you analyzed Marcus's healthcare deal. That's the Vale method, find the human cost, expose the structural weaknesses." He laughed, delighted. "You were testing him." "I was being honest with him." "Honest?" Patricia Castellanos appeared beside her husband, her earlier condescension completely evaporated. "Mr. Vale, if we'd known who you were last night, the entire conversation would have been different." "That's exactly why I didn't tell you." Catherine pushed through the crowd with the determination of someone who'd just realized she'd catastrophically misjudged a situation. "Mr. Vale, Reed. May I call you Reed? I must apologize for any misunderstanding at dinner last night. If we'd known about your background, your achievements..." "You would have treated me differently," Ethan finished, respected me more, found my life choices more acceptable, decided I was worthy of your daughter's time. Catherine had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. Well, context matters. It shouldn't. Not this kind of context. Ethan looked past her to where Lena still sat, her face pale, her hands gripping the chair arms hard enough that her knuckles were white. I'm the same person I was last night. Same values, same priorities, same life. The only thing that's changed is what you know about my bank account. But you're Reed Vale, Richard said, as if this explained everything. You're not some struggling freelancer. You're exactly what I told you I was. A single father who values his daughter over his career. The fact that I used to have a different career doesn't change that. Victoria's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with hurt and confusion. Could someone please explain what's happening? Marcus, you left me at the altar to talk to a guest I've never met? Marcus turned back to his bride, seeming to remember suddenly that he was in the middle of getting married. Tori, I'm sorry, this is Reed Vale. Do you understand what that means? I understand that you walked away from me during our wedding ceremony. I understand that right now I'm standing here in front of everyone we know looking like a fool. Her voice cracked. I understand that apparently some investor I've never heard of is more important than our vows. The guilt that washed over Marcus's face was genuine and devastating. You're right. I'm sorry. I was shocked. I never thought I'd see him again. And that was worth humiliating me? Ethan took a step back, trying to remove himself from the center of this disaster, but the crowd had formed around him like a wall. People were still on their phones, still whispering, still pointing. He could feel the weight of their attention, their calculation, their sudden reassessment of his worth. This was exactly what he'd feared, exactly why he'd hidden. Because in rooms like this, with people like this, your value was determined by your utility, and Reed Vale was infinitely more useful than Ethan Cole could ever be. He looked at Lena again and saw something that might have been betrayal, or might have been vindication, or might have been both. She stood slowly, smoothing down her dress with mechanical precision. Mother, father, everyone! Her voice carried the particular authority of someone who'd spent their life in rooms like this and knew how to command them. I think we should let Victoria and Marcus finish their ceremony. Whatever revelations about Ethan's past might be interesting, they're not relevant to my sister's wedding. Not relevant? Catherine looked at her daughter like she'd lost her mind. Lena, this is Reed Vale. Do you understand what this means for what, Mother? For you? For our family's social standing? For your ability to name drop at your next charity luncheon? Lena's composure was cracking, her voice rising. Ethan is my friend. That's all that matters. Not who he used to be or what he used to do or how impressive his resume is. But you didn't know, Richard said, his tone making it an accusation. He lied to you. He didn't lie. He just didn't volunteer information that wasn't relevant to our friendship. Lena moved down the aisle toward Ethan, and the crowd parted for her automatically. Unlike all of you, I liked him before I knew his net worth. I valued his company before I knew he was someone you'd consider valuable. And that's not going to change now. She reached Ethan and took his hand, her grip tight and trembling. I think we should go. Lena, you can't leave your sister's wedding, Catherine started. Watch me. Lena turned back to Victoria, and her expression softened. I'm sorry, Tori. I'm sorry your day got hijacked by this circus. You deserve better. You deserve a ceremony that's about you and Marcus, not about Mother's social ambitions or Father's networking opportunities or the spectacular revelation that my +1 used to be somebody important. Victoria's eyes were bright with tears. You're really leaving? I really am, because if I stay, this won't get better. People will just keep making this about Ethan instead of about you. She squeezed Ethan's hand, and because I'm done performing for an audience that only cares about me when I'm useful to them. The walk out of that ballroom was the longest of Ethan's life. 200 pairs of eyes tracking their exit, 200 voices murmuring speculation and judgment. He heard fragments as they passed, dissolved a $100 million firm, completely disappeared. What's he worth now? Why would he waste his talent editing books? Each comment a reminder of why he'd run in the first place. They made it to the lobby before Lena's father caught up with them, slightly out of breath and visibly angry in the way wealthy men get when their authority is questioned. Lena Margaret Harrington, you get back in there right now. No. Lena's voice was steady, final. I'm done, Dad. Done pretending this family cares about anything beyond status and appearances. Done sacrificing my actual happiness for your version of success. This is about that boy? That, Richard gestured dismissively at Ethan. That fraud who's been lying to you for months? Don't call him that. Lena's voice went cold. Ethan has been more honest with me in 6 months than any of you have been in my entire life. He told me exactly who he was, a father who prioritized his daughter over his career. The fact that his career used to be impressive doesn't change that truth. He deceived you, deceived all of us. No, Dad, you deceived yourself. You assumed that because Ethan was a freelance editor, he must be struggling and unambitious and not worth your respect. You made that judgment based on class and status and all the shallow metrics you've taught me to value my entire life. She took a shaky breath. And I'm done valuing them. I'm done measuring my worth by your standards. I'm done pretending that success looks like you think it should. Richard's expression cycled through anger to disbelief to something that might have been hurt. Everything your mother and I did, we did for you in Victoria. To give you opportunities, security. You gave us expectations, Lena interrupted, and then you made us feel like failures when we couldn't live up to them. Victoria found someone who checked all your boxes, and look how you're all treating her wedding, like a networking event instead of a celebration of her love. That's not fair, Lena. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked me if I was happy instead of asking me about my quarterly revenue? When was the last time you cared about who I was instead of who I could be useful to? The question hung between them, unanswerable because they both knew what the answer was. Catherine appeared then, slightly wild-eyed, her perfect composure finally cracked. Lena, people are talking. This is becoming a scene. Think about your sister. Think about the family. I am thinking about my family, Mother. I'm thinking about how exhausting it is to be part of one that only values me when I'm performing correctly. Lena's voice broke slightly. I'm thinking about how I've spent 35 years trying to earn approval I'm never going to get because the metric keeps changing. I'm thinking about how the only time I've felt like myself in months is sitting in a bookstore cafe with a man you deemed unworthy because he doesn't have the right pedigree. That man lied to you, Catherine insisted. No, you lied to me. You told me that success meant corner offices and designer clothes and marrying someone from the right family. You told me that happiness was the same as achievement and that love was less important than status. And I believed you for so long that I almost forgot what actually mattered. Ethan had stayed silent through all of this, recognizing that this confrontation was years in the making and had very little to do with him. But Catherine turned to him now, her expression one of cold fury. This is your fault. You've poisoned her against us, turned her into someone with boundaries, Ethan said quietly. Into someone who knows her worth isn't determined by your approval? If that's poison, then yes, I'm guilty. You used her, got close to her under false pretenses so you could, infiltrate our social circles, rebuild your reputation? I got close to her because she was kind and honest and exhausted by the same things that exhausted me. Because we understood each other. Because for 6 months, we got to be people instead of assets. He looked at Richard and Catherine, at their perfectly maintained facades cracking under the weight of a reality they couldn't control. I don't want anything from you. Not your connections, not your approval, not your social standing. I just want to live a quiet life with my daughter, and maybe, if she'll still have me, spend Tuesday and Friday afternoons with your daughter in a bookstore cafe where none of this other stuff matters. She deserves better than a has-been hiding from his own success, Richard said. She deserves someone who sees her as a person instead of a reflection of family ambition, Ethan countered. And if you can't see the difference, then that's exactly the problem. They stood in the hotel lobby, 4 people at an impasse, while somewhere in the ballroom Victoria's wedding ceremony either continued or collapsed entirely. Ethan waited for Lena to choose, her family or this fragile thing they'd built, the comfortable prison of expectations or the terrifying freedom of honesty. Lena looked at her parents for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted from conflict to clarity. I love you both, I do. But I don't like who I become when I'm trying to please you, and I can't keep sacrificing my actual life for your version of what my life should be. So that's it? Catherine's voice was brittle. You're choosing him over your family? I'm choosing myself, Mother. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I actually want instead of what I'm supposed to want. She looked at Ethan. And what I want is to get out of this hotel and away from this disaster and go somewhere I can actually breathe. They walked out together into the unseasonable February warmth, leaving behind the elegant chaos of a wedding that would be talked about for years, though probably not for the reasons Victoria had hoped. In the parking lot, Lena finally let herself break. She leaned against Ethan's car and started laughing, slightly hysterical, tears streaming down her face. I just walked out of my sister's wedding. I just publicly rejected my parents in front of everyone they know. She couldn't finish, overwhelmed by the enormity of what she'd done. Ethan pulled her close, letting her cry into his Tom Ford suit that had caused all this trouble in the first place. You were magnificent. I was insane. I ruined everything. You were honest. Finally, actually honest. She pulled back enough to look at him, her mascara ruined and her careful hairstyle coming apart. Why didn't you tell me? About Reed Vale, about who you used to be? Because I needed someone to know me as who I am now, not who I used to be. Because every time someone knew about my past, they stopped seeing me and started seeing potential, networking opportunities, a resource to be leveraged. He touched her face gently. With you, I got to be Ethan, just Ethan, and that was worth protecting. Even if it meant lying, I never lied. I just didn't volunteer information that would change how you saw me. It does change how I see you, though. She said it sadly, like an admission of failure. I can't unknown it now. Can't go back to seeing you as just the guy who drinks black coffee and edits manuscripts. Then see me as both, Ethan said. See me as someone who used to be Reed Vale and chose to become Ethan Cole. See me as someone who had everything your parents value and decided it wasn't worth keeping. See me as... He stopped, trying to find the right words. See me as someone who's terrified you'll only want the successful version instead of the real one. Lena was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. The real one is the one who chose his daughter over his career. The real one is the one who spent 6 months having coffee with me without once trying to impress me or use me or turn our friendship into a transaction. She smiled, watery and genuine. Reed Vale is impressive, but Ethan Cole is good, and I think I prefer good. Somewhere in the hotel behind them, a wedding was happening or not happening, and Lena's family was either scandalized or outraged or both. Tomorrow there would be consequences, conversations, recriminations. But standing in the parking lot in the late afternoon sun, Ethan and Lena had chosen honesty over performance, and that felt like revolution. They ended up at a diner 3 miles from the hotel, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a laminated menu that hadn't changed since 1987. Lena still wore her expensive blue dress and ruined makeup. Ethan still wore his Tom Ford suit that now felt like a costume he couldn't wait to take off. The teenage waitress who took their order didn't blink at their formal attire, just asked if they wanted coffee and brought 2 cups without waiting for an answer. My phone won't stop buzzing, Lena said, staring at the device on the table between them like it might explode. 17 missed calls from her mother, 12 from her father, 6 from Victoria, and a growing collection of text messages that Lena refused to open. You don't have to answer. I know, but ignoring them feels like, I don't know, cowardice? Like I made this dramatic exit and now I'm hiding from the consequences. Sometimes hiding from consequences is called self-preservation. Lena smiled, but it was fragile. Is that what you've been doing, preserving yourself? Trying to, not always successfully. Ethan wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, grateful for something to hold. After Maya's mother died, I spent 6 months trying to do everything. Run the firm, be a present father, maintain the life I'd built. And I was failing at all of it. Failing my daughter most of all. What happened to her mother? If you don't mind me asking. Car accident, drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly. The words still hurt even 2 years later, even though he and Sarah had been divorced for a year before the accident. We weren't together anymore. Hadn't been for a while. But she was still Maya's mother, still someone I'd loved once, and suddenly she was just gone. I'm so sorry. The worst part was watching Maya try to process it. She was 5 years old and her mother disappeared from her life overnight. And I was so busy trying to keep the firm running that I barely noticed how much she was struggling. Her teacher called me one day because Maya had stopped talking at school, just completely silent for 3 weeks, and I hadn't even noticed because I'd been too focused on a merger that didn't matter. Lena reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. That's when I realized I had to choose, Ethan continued. I couldn't be Reed Vale and be the father Maya needed. So I picked the one that mattered, liquidated the firm, paid everyone out, disappeared, moved here, changed my name back to the one my mother gave me before I rebranded myself for business, and started over. Do you regret it? Never. Not once. Maya talks now. She laughs. She builds dinosaur habitats out of couch cushions and asks impossible questions about the universe. She knows I'll pick her up from school on time every time. She knows I'm hers. He met Lena's eyes. That's worth more than any deal I ever closed. Your parents must have been proud. Of Reed Vale, I mean, before you walked away. My father died when I was 12. Heart attack. Left my mother with nothing but debt and broken promises. She worked 3 jobs to keep our apartment, to keep me in school. Ethan's voice went quiet. She never saw me succeed. Died of cancer my 2nd year of college. I built Reed Vale partly for her, to prove that her sacrifices weren't wasted. But she never knew. Ethan, it's okay. It was a long time ago. But it's part of why I understood what success was supposed to look like. Why I chased it so hard. I thought if I made enough money, achieved enough, it would somehow retroactively make her struggle worthwhile. He laughed, bitter. Took me 15 years to realize that what would have made her happiest was me being a good father to her granddaughter, not me being rich. Lena was quiet for a long moment, processing. My parents are still alive and I barely know them. I know their expectations, their disappointments, their version of who I should be, but I don't know what they actually think about anything real. We've spent so many years performing for each other that I'm not sure there's anything authentic left. It's not too late to change that, isn't it? You saw what just happened. I told them the truth, and they couldn't hear it. All they could focus on was that you'd been Reed Vale all along, like that somehow vindicated their worldview. What did you want them to focus on? That you were kind to me when you had no reason to be. That you listened when I talked about being tired and didn't try to fix me or manage me or turn my exhaustion into a networking opportunity. She looked down at their joined hands. That you saw me as a person instead of a strategic asset. That matters more than any resume. The waitress returned with their food. Pancakes for Lena, a burger for Ethan, neither of them particularly hungry, but both grateful for something to do with their hands. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the diner buzzing around them with the ordinary sounds of ordinary people living ordinary lives. My phone is ringing again, Lena said finally, watching it vibrate across the table. Victoria this time. You should probably answer that one. Lena nodded and picked up the phone, her expression apprehensive. Tori? I'm so sorry, She stopped, listening, her face cycling through confusion to surprise to something that might have been relief. Wait, what? Slow down. More listening. You did what? A pause. No, I'm actually really proud of you. Another pause, then a small laugh. Yeah, he's here with me. We're at a diner eating pancakes in formal wear like insane people. Silence. While Victoria spoke, then Lena's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. Tell Marcus I'm sorry for the chaos. She hung up and stared at Ethan with an expression he couldn't quite read. What happened? Victoria stopped the wedding. After we left, she told Marcus she needed to think. Told everyone to go to the reception without them and spent an hour in the hotel garden just talking to him. Really talking, apparently, for maybe the first time since they got engaged. Lena's voice was thick with emotion. She asked him if he actually wanted to marry her, or if he just wanted to marry the idea of her, if he loved her, or loved what she represented. What did he say? He said he didn't know, that he thought they were the same thing, that he'd been so focused on building the right life that he'd forgotten to check whether it was a life he actually wanted. Lena wiped at her eyes, smearing her already ruined mascara further. They're postponing the wedding, maybe permanently. Victoria said she needs to figure out who she is, separate from everyone's expectations. She thanked me for having the courage to walk out because it gave her permission to stop and think. How's your mother handling that? About as well as you'd expect. Apparently she's locked herself in the bridal suite and won't come out. My father is trying to manage the guests and salvage the reception. It's a disaster. But Lena was smiling as she said it, genuine and free. A beautiful disaster. And Marcus? He's apparently sitting in the garden having some kind of existential crisis about whether he's been living his own life or just following a script someone else wrote for him. She laughed, slightly hysterical. Your existence broke my sister's wedding and caused her fiancé to question his entire life trajectory. That's quite an impact for one afternoon. I'm not sure I should take credit for that. You should, or blame. I haven't decided which. Lena's phone buzzed again, and she glanced at it. My mother. Third time in 5 minutes. You going to answer? Eventually. When I figure out what to say that's honest without being cruel. She set the phone down. How did you do it? Walk away from everything and not look back? Who says I didn't look back? Did you? Ethan considered the question carefully. Every day for the first 6 months. Wondered if I'd made a mistake, if I was wasting my potential, if I was failing some obligation to use my talents in the biggest way possible. I had former clients calling, colleagues trying to lure me back, headhunters offering obscene packages to return to the game. What changed? Maya came home from school one day and told me she'd drawn a picture of our family. Just the two of us, holding hands, smiling. And I realized that was the first time since Sarah died that she'd drawn herself smiling. The first time she'd included me in her picture of family instead of just drawing herself alone. He had to stop, the memory still sharp enough to hurt. That's when I knew I'd made the right choice. Because my daughter was healing, and I was there to witness it. Do you miss it? The work? The challenge? I don't know, the feeling of being important? I miss the intellectual challenge sometimes, the satisfaction of solving complex problems, but I don't miss the person I had to be to do that work. Reed Vale was brilliant and successful and completely hollowed out. He valued the deal over the people. He saw every relationship as transactional. He was so busy building an empire that he forgot to build a life. And Ethan Cole? Ethan Cole is happy, really, genuinely happy in a way Reed Vale never was. He drinks black coffee in bookstore cafes and edits manuscripts that will never be bestsellers and plays dinosaurs with his daughter. He has exactly one friend who knows him well enough to see when he's pretending to be okay, when he's not. He squeezed her hand. That friend is worth more than everything Reed Vale ever built. Lena's phone rang again. This time it was her father. She let it ring through to voicemail, her jaw set with determination. I'm not ready yet. They're not calling to apologize or understand. They're calling to manage the situation, to get me back in line, to repair the damage to the family image. How do you know? Because that's what they always do. They don't do feelings or vulnerability or actual honest conversation. They do damage control and strategic repositioning and carefully worded statements that acknowledge nothing while appearing to acknowledge everything. She pushed her barely touched pancakes away. God, I sound bitter. You sound hurt. There's a difference. I don't want to be hurt by them anymore. I want to just not care. To build a life so full and satisfying that their approval becomes irrelevant. That's harder than it sounds. Is it still hard for you? Even now? Ethan thought about the moments when he still found himself calculating his worth in metrics that no longer mattered, still measuring his success against men like Richard Harrington, who defined success in zeros and titles. Sometimes, old habits die hard, but it gets easier when you have something real to measure against. When you can look at your actual life and feel proud of it, not just proud of how it looks to other people. They sat in the diner until the dinner rush started, and the waitress began giving them pointed looks about taking up valuable booth space. Outside, the February evening had turned cold, the unseasonable warmth fleeing with the sunset. Lena shivered in her thin dress, and Ethan offered her his suit jacket, which she accepted with a small smile. I should go home, she said without moving. Face the music. Check my voicemail. Probably have a complete breakdown in private where no one has to witness it. Or, Ethan said carefully, You could come to my place, meet Maya, see what ordinary life looks like when you're not performing for anyone. Lena looked at him for a long moment, surprised. You want me to meet your daughter? Tonight? After this disaster of a day? Maya's been asking about the friend I have coffee with twice a week. She's convinced you're either imaginary or secretly a spy. Might be good to prove you're real. I'm not exactly in meeting the daughter condition. She gestured at her tear-stained face and wrinkled dress. I look like I lost a fight with my entire life. Perfect. That's the most honest you've looked all day. They drove to Ethan's apartment in separate cars, Lena following his taillights through familiar streets that probably looked different to her now, seeing them through the lens of his actual life instead of the careful fiction he'd maintained. He found himself nervous in a way he hadn't been nervous in years, aware that he was letting her into the last protected space he had, the home he'd built for Maya where Reedvale didn't exist and Ethan Cole was just dad. Mrs. Chen opened the door before he could use his key, Maya already in her pajamas and bouncing with 7-year-old energy that should have been depleted hours ago. Daddy, you're home early. Mrs. Chen let me stay up because I said you'd want to tell me about the fancy party. She stopped when she saw Lena standing behind him. Who's that? Maya, this is Lena. Lena, this is my daughter Maya, who was supposed to be asleep an hour ago. I'm not tired, Maya announced, which was obviously a lie given the way she was rubbing her eyes. Are you the coffee friend? I am, Lena said, and her voice was softer than Ethan had ever heard it. Your dad talks about you all the time. He does. Maya looked pleased and suspicious in equal measure. What does he say? That you love dinosaurs and you ask very complicated questions, and you're the best part of his entire day. Maya considered this, evaluating Lena with the particular intensity of children who haven't yet learned to hide their assessments. You look sad. Did someone make you cry? Maya, Ethan started. It's okay, Lena interrupted. Yes, someone made me cry. Actually, a lot of someone's. But I think maybe I needed to cry, so it's not all bad. My daddy says crying is just feelings leaking out because you have too many of them. Is that what happened? That's exactly what happened. Do you want to see my dinosaur collection? I have 17 dinosaurs and I know all their real names, not just the made-up movie names. Lena looked at Ethan, and he saw the question in her eyes. Was this okay? Was she intruding? Should she leave? He nodded slightly, and she turned back to Maya with a genuine smile. I would love to see your dinosaur collection. Mrs. Chen left with a knowing look and a gentle pat on Ethan's arm. Maya dragged Lena to her room with the determination of someone who'd been waiting weeks to show someone her treasures. Ethan followed, leaning against the doorframe and watching his daughter explain the difference between Allosaurus and Acrocanthosaurus with passionate intensity, while Lena listened like Maya's lecture was the most important thing she'd ever heard. And this one is Parasaurolophus, Maya said, holding up a purple plastic dinosaur. Most people think the crest is for making sounds, but scientists think maybe it was for smelling things really good. Isn't that cool? That's amazing, Lena said, and she meant it. Which one is your favorite? Maya didn't hesitate. Ankylosaurus, because it has armor and a club tail, and everyone thinks it's slow and dumb, but actually it's really smart and just protects itself differently than the other dinosaurs. That's a good reason to have a favorite. What's your favorite dinosaur? Lena thought about it seriously. I think maybe Stegosaurus, because it looks scary, but it's actually just trying to mind its own business and not hurt anyone. Maya nodded like this was acceptable. Daddy, I like her. Can she stay for breakfast? It's bedtime, kiddo, not breakfast time. But I'm not tired, and Lena just got here, and we didn't even talk about Triceratops yet. Ethan crossed the room and scooped Maya into his arms despite her protests. Triceratops will still exist tomorrow. Right now, you need sleep. But no buts. Teeth brushed, bed, story, same as every night. Maya sighed with the dramatic resignation of a child who knew when she'd lost a battle. Fine, but Lena has to come back. I didn't get to show her my chapter book collection. I promised to come back, Lena said, if your dad says it's okay. It's definitely okay, Maya announced with the absolute certainty of someone who'd already decided this was settled. Daddy needs more friends. He only has you and Mrs. Chen, and that's not enough friends for a grown-up. After Maya was tucked in with a story about a dinosaur who learned to be brave, Ethan found Lena in his living room examining the space with quiet interest. It was small and cluttered in the way of homes where people actually lived. Maya's drawings on the fridge, library books stacked on the coffee table, a basket of laundry that needed folding that he'd been ignoring for 3 days. "This is nice," Lena said. "It feels real, like a place where people are actually happy." "Most days we are. Some days we're just surviving, but we do it together." He moved to the kitchen. "Coffee, or something stronger? I think I have wine somewhere." "Coffee is good, black, obviously." He made coffee while she continued exploring his small apartment, looking at Maya's school projects on the walls, the photographs of moments that mattered. Maya's first day of school, a trip to the science museum, the two of them covered in flour after an ambitious baking project. "You don't have any pictures of before," Lena observed. "Nothing from your Reed Vale days." "That life ended. These pictures are of the life I'm actually living." She accepted the coffee and settled onto his worn couch, looking smaller and more vulnerable than she had in the diner. "Your daughter is wonderful." "I know, she's the best thing I ever did." "She loves you completely. You can see it in how she looks at you, how she talks about you. She trusts that you'll be there." "I will be. Always." Lena was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee. "My parents never looked at me like that, even when I was Maya's age. They looked at me like a project, something to be improved and shaped and presented to the world. I don't think they ever just saw me. Their loss. Is it, though? Maybe I'm just not the kind of person who inspires that kind of uncomplicated love. Maybe I'm too difficult, too demanding, too—" "Stop." Ethan set down his coffee and moved to sit beside her. "You're not too anything. You're just right for someone who's willing to see you clearly. Your parents couldn't see you because they were too busy looking at their version of who you should be. And you see me clearly? I see someone who's brilliant and exhausted and brave enough to walk away from a life that was killing her slowly. I see someone who shows up twice a week to a bookstore cafe just to exist without judgment. I see—" He stopped, aware he was about to say too much. "What?" "I see someone I care about more than I probably should after only 6 months." Lena set down her own coffee and turned to face him fully. "Why shouldn't you? Why do we do that? Tell ourselves we shouldn't care too much or too fast, like feelings come with a timeline that has to be respected. Because caring makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability is dangerous." "Is it? Or is pretending not to care more dangerous?" She reached for his hand. "I spent years in a relationship with someone I didn't love because loving him would have required vulnerability, and vulnerability felt like weakness. And you know what happened? I wasted 3 years of my life performing a relationship that meant nothing because we were both too afraid to be honest." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to pretend anymore. Not with you. Not about this." She took a shaky breath. "Today was a disaster. My sister's wedding imploded. I publicly rejected my parents. Your secret identity got exposed in the most dramatic way possible. And somehow sitting here in your apartment drinking coffee while your daughter sleeps in the next room, I feel more okay than I've felt in years." "Lena, let me finish. I know this is complicated. I know we barely know each other in the ways that supposedly matter. I know there are 1,000 logical reasons to slow down and be careful and not risk what we've built." She looked at him with eyes that were clear and certain. "But I don't want logical anymore. I want real. And this, us, here, now, this feels real in a way nothing else in my life does." Ethan could have listed all the reasons this was too fast, too complicated, too risky, could have pointed out that they'd only known each other 6 months, that most of that time was spent in a cafe maintaining careful boundaries, that introducing romantic feelings would change everything and might destroy the friendship that had saved them both. Could have protected himself the way he'd learned to protect himself, by keeping everyone at a safe distance where they couldn't hurt him. But he was so tired of protecting himself, tired of hiding, tired of pretending that the way he felt about Lena was simple or manageable or anything other than the most honest thing in his carefully constructed life. "You're right," he said. "This is real and terrifying, and I have no idea how to do this without ruining it. Maybe we don't have to know how. Maybe we just have to be willing to try. And if it doesn't work, then at least we tried something honest instead of settling for something safe. She moved closer. I've done safe my entire life, Ethan. Safe is exhausting. Safe is slowly dying of boredom and disappointment while pretending everything is fine. And this? What is this? Alive. This is alive. He kissed her then, soft and careful, aware that they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She kissed him back with an urgency that suggested she'd been waiting for this, that maybe she'd been feeling the same impossible things he'd been feeling every Tuesday and Friday for months. When they pulled apart, she was crying again, but this time it looked like relief. Is Maya going to think this is weird? She asked. Her dad's coffee friend suddenly being whatever this is? She already told me I needed more friends. Pretty sure she's been campaigning for this since I first mentioned you. Smart kid. She takes after her dad. Lena laughed and settled against him, her head on his shoulder, both of them aware that tomorrow would bring consequences and conversations and complications they hadn't begun to address. But for now, in his small apartment above a hardware store, they were just two people who'd chosen honesty over performance and found something real in the wreckage of a wedding that never happened. Outside, the February night was cold and clear, and somewhere across town, Victoria was having her own reckoning with truth, and Catherine Harrington was probably planning damage control strategies, and Marcus Castellanos was questioning every choice that had led him to this moment. But inside, Ethan Cole and Lena Harrington were finally fully themselves, and that felt like revolution. Morning arrived with Maya jumping on Ethan's bed at 6:45, completely unconcerned that it was Sunday and normal people slept in on Sundays. Daddy, is Lena still here? Can she have pancakes with us? I want to show her my book about pterosaurs. Ethan blinked awake to find his daughter's face inches from his own, her breath smelling like toothpaste, because she'd apparently already gotten herself ready for the day. Lena went home last night, kiddo, remember? But she said she'd come back. She will, just not at 6:45 in the morning. Maya looked disappointed, but recovered quickly with the resilience of 7-year-olds. Fine, but you have to make the good pancakes, the ones with chocolate chips. By the time they'd finished breakfast and Maya had thoroughly destroyed the kitchen in her quest to help clean up, Ethan's phone had accumulated another dozen missed calls and twice as many text messages. Most were from numbers he didn't recognize, former colleagues, business reporters, people he hadn't spoken to in over a year, all suddenly very interested in where Reed Vale had disappeared to and whether he was planning a comeback. There were also 3 voicemails from Catherine Harrington, each one progressively more demanding. He listened to them while Maya watched cartoons, Catherine's voice cycling from artificially pleasant to barely controlled fury across the span of 12 hours. The last one, left at 2 in the morning, was different. Mr. Vale, Ethan, whatever you prefer to be called, we need to discuss what happened yesterday. More specifically, we need to discuss my daughter and the extremely poor decision she appears to be making under your influence. I've scheduled lunch for tomorrow at 1 o'clock at the Riverside Club. I expect you to be there. This is not optional. Ethan deleted the voicemail and was about to ignore the summons entirely when his phone rang with Lena's number. Please tell me my mother didn't actually call you demanding a meeting, she said without preamble. She did. Tomorrow at 1. The Riverside Club. That's her power move location, where she takes people she needs to intimidate with expensive wine and the weight of old money. Lena sounded exhausted. You're not going, right? Should I? Absolutely not. She'll just try to, I don't know, buy you off, threaten you, convince you that you're not good enough for me using very polite language and impeccable table manners. What if I want to go? There was a long pause. Why would you want to subject yourself to that? Because she's your mother. Because this situation isn't going away just because we ignore it. Because maybe it's time to actually have the conversation instead of avoiding it. Ethan, she's not going to listen. She's going to present you with all the reasons our relationship is inappropriate and impractical and doomed to failure. She's going to make you feel small and inadequate, even though you're literally Reed Vale and have accomplished more than most people dream of. Then let her try. I've survived worse than Catherine Harrington's disapproval. I'm coming with you. She invited me alone. I don't care. This is about me too, and I'm done letting her control the narrative. Lena's voice was firm. We do this together or not at all. The Riverside Club was exactly what Ethan expected. All dark wood and brass fixtures and portraits of important men who'd been dead for decades but whose money still spoke loudly. The kind of place that required jackets for men and judged women on the subtlety of their jewelry. He and Lena arrived together, her hand in his, both of them dressed like they were going to battle disguised as lunch. Catherine was already seated at a corner table, positioned so she could see the entire dining room and be seen by everyone in it. She looked immaculate in a way that suggested she hadn't slept, but had spent hours ensuring no one would know it. Her smile when she saw them was sharp enough to cut. Lena, I wasn't aware you'd be joining us. That's because you didn't invite me to a conversation about my own life. Lena sat down without waiting for permission. But here I am anyway. Catherine's eyes flicked to their joined hands, then away, dismissing what she saw as temporary insanity. Mr. Vale, or should I call you Mr. Cole? I'm unclear on which identity you prefer when you're not actively deceiving people. Ethan is fine. How modern. She signaled the waiter with the subtle gesture of someone who'd never been ignored in her life. Wine? Or are you one of those reformed addicts who can't be around alcohol? Mother, Lena's voice carried a warning. I'm simply trying to understand who this man actually is, since he's been lying about it for months. I never lied, Ethan said calmly. I told Lena exactly who I was. A freelance editor, a single father, someone who valued his daughter over his career. All of that was true. Lies of omission are still lies. You deliberately withheld information that would have changed how people perceived you. Yes, that was the point. Catherine's composure cracked slightly. The point was to deceive my daughter into a relationship with someone she thought was, what, safe, harmless, not threatening to her independence? The point was to be seen as a person instead of a resource, to build a relationship based on actual compatibility instead of strategic advantage. How noble. And now that your secret is out, what exactly are your intentions toward Lena? My intentions are to continue caring about her, spending time with her, and supporting whatever choices she makes about her life. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. We're not characters in a business negotiation, Catherine. We're people trying to figure out how to be honest with each other in a world that rewards performance over authenticity. The waiter arrived and Catherine ordered for all of them, without asking what they wanted. A power move so obvious it was almost quaint. When he left, she leaned forward, her expression one of carefully controlled concern. Lena, sweetheart, I need you to understand something. This man, whoever he is now, built a career on identifying vulnerable companies and extracting maximum value from them. He's very good at seeing what people need and positioning himself as the solution. You think I'm a vulnerable company? Lena's voice was dangerously quiet. I think you've been unhappy for years, searching for something that feels real, something that matters. And along comes someone who presents himself as exactly what you've been looking for. Uncomplicated, authentic, free from the expectations you've been suffocating under. Catherine's voice softened into something that might have been genuine worry. But he's not uncomplicated, Lena. He's Reed Vale. He's just as calculating as any of us, just better at hiding it. That's not fair, Ethan said. Isn't it? You walked away from hundreds of millions of dollars, dissolved a successful firm, and disappeared completely. That's not the behavior of someone seeking simplicity. That's the behavior of someone running from something or towards something, and either way, it's strategic, calculated. You're right. I was running. From a life that was destroying me, from expectations I couldn't meet, from the person I'd become in pursuit of other people's definitions of success. Ethan met her eyes. But I wasn't running toward your daughter. I was running toward the possibility of being a good father. Lena she is, something I didn't plan for and don't know how to categorize. And that terrifies me because I can't strategize my way through genuine feeling. Genuine feeling, Catherine said it like she was tasting something sour. You'll forgive me if I'm skeptical about the genuine feelings of a man who's made a career out of emotional manipulation. I never manipulated anyone. I restructured failing businesses based on financial analysis and market dynamics. And you never considered the human cost? The workers who lost their jobs, the communities that lost their employers, the families that lost their stability? The accusation landed hard because it was true. Ethan had considered those costs, had factored them into his analyses as acceptable losses in service of larger economic efficiency. He'd told himself he was saving companies, preserving what could be preserved, making hard but necessary choices. But Catherine was right that he'd valued spreadsheets over people, returns over relationships, success over suffering. "You're right," he said quietly. "I did terrible things in the name of business. I made choices that hurt people and told myself it was justified because I was following economic principles. I was Reed Vale, and Reed Vale valued profit over people. And now you're Ethan Cole, who values what? Love? Family? The simple pleasures of modest living?" Catherine's skepticism was palpable. "People don't change that fundamentally. Not really." "Mother, stop," Lena's voice cut through the tension. "You're not worried about me. You're worried about what this looks like, about what people will say, about whether my relationship with Ethan damages the family reputation or disrupts your social standing. That's not true, isn't it? When Victoria postponed her wedding, your first response wasn't to ask if she was okay. It was to calculate how to manage the fallout. When I walked out yesterday, you didn't call to see if I needed support. You called to tell me I was making a scene." Lena's composure was cracking, years of accumulated hurt breaking through. "You've never asked what I actually want. You've only ever told me what I should want and then been disappointed when I couldn't perform happiness convincingly enough. I've tried to give you every advantage. You've tried to give me your version of success, your dreams, your ambitions, your definition of a life worth living. But they were never mine, Mother. They were never mine." Catherine was silent for a long moment, her perfectly maintained facade showing hairline cracks. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, less certain. "What do you want, Lena? If not the career we supported you in building, if not the social connections we spent years cultivating, if not the life we hoped you'd have, what do you actually want?" "I want to wake up in the morning without dreading the day ahead. I want to have conversations that aren't performances. I want to care about people who care about me for reasons that have nothing to do with my resume or my family name." Lena's voice broke. "I want to feel like myself instead of feeling like a collection of other people's expectations wearing a Lena costume." "And he gives you that?" Catherine looked at Ethan with something that might have been genuine curiosity. "A man who spent 15 years building an identity based entirely on achievement and acquisition suddenly makes you feel authentic?" "He makes me feel seen," Lena said simply. "Not evaluated, not assessed, not measured against some impossible standard, just seen. For 6 months I could sit in a cafe twice a week and be exactly who I am, and that was enough. He never asked me to be more successful or more ambitious or more anything. I was just enough." Catherine's eyes were bright with tears she'd never let fall in public. "You were always enough, Lena. You were always more than enough." "Then why didn't it feel that way? Why did every conversation feel like a performance review? Why did every achievement come with suggestions for how to achieve more?" "Because I wanted better for you than what I had. I wanted you to have choices, freedom, the ability to stand on your own without needing anyone." Catherine's voice was raw. "My mother raised me to be decorative and agreeable, to marry well and manage households and never question whether there was more. I fought for every inch of respect I have, and I wanted you to not have to fight, to start from a position of strength. But you taught me that strength meant never needing anyone. That vulnerability was weakness. That love was something to be managed and controlled rather than felt and risked." Lena reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of her mother's. "I don't want to be strong like that anymore. I want to be strong enough to admit I need people, to admit that I'm tired and scared and don't have all the answers." Their lunch arrived, elaborately plated food that none of them would eat, and the three of them sat in heavy silence while servers fussed and departed. Around them, the club's other patrons conducted their own power lunches, their own delicate negotiations of money and influence and social positioning. It was a world Ethan knew intimately and had chosen to leave, a world Lena was still learning to name as the prison it had always been. "I can't give you my blessing," Catherine said finally, "not because I think you're making a mistake, necessarily, but because I don't know how to let go of the life I imagined for you, the future I spent years constructing in my mind. I'm not asking for your blessing, Lena said. I'm asking for your acceptance that my life is mine to live, even if it looks nothing like what you wanted. And if you're wrong, if this relationship fails, if you give up your career for someone who can't give you the stability you need, if you end up with regrets, then they'll be my regrets, my mistakes, my life. Lena's voice was gentle but firm. You can't protect me from pain by controlling my choices. You can only teach me that I'm not capable of handling my own life. Catherine looked at Ethan then, really looked at him, her expression cycling through judgment to assessment to something that might have been reluctant understanding. You hurt her, and I will make it my life's mission to destroy whatever credibility you have left in the business world. Reed Vale may be retired, but I guarantee I can find ways to make your life uncomfortable. I don't doubt it. And if you're using her, if this is some elaborate scheme to reintegrate yourself into social circles or rebuild your reputation through our family connections, I have no interest in your social circles or family connections. I have every interest in your daughter's happiness, which includes having a functional relationship with her family if that's possible. Why should I believe you? Because I gave up everything I'd built to be a present father to my daughter. Because I've spent 14 months living quietly in a small apartment above a hardware store when I could have leveraged my reputation and connections to build something new. Because the only thing I want from Lena is more Tuesday and Friday afternoons in a bookstore cafe where we can both just be ourselves. Catherine studied him for a long moment, and Ethan could see her calculating, assessing, trying to find the angle or manipulation she was certain must exist. But there was no angle. There was just a man who'd learned the hard way that success without authenticity was just expensive emptiness, and a woman who was desperately trying to learn the same lesson before she spent her entire life performing for an audience that would never be satisfied. I don't understand you, Catherine said finally. Either of you. But I suppose I don't have to understand to... She stopped, struggling with words that didn't come naturally to her. To accept that you're both adults making your own choices. It wasn't approval. It wasn't even really acceptance. But it was the beginning of something, a hairline crack in Catherine's perfect facade that suggested maybe, eventually, there might be room for honest conversation instead of strategic positioning. They left the club separately, Catherine staying to manage her reputation, and Lena and Ethan escaping to the parking lot like survivors of a natural disaster. In the car, Lena started laughing, slightly hysterical, tears streaming down her face. That was the most honest conversation I've ever had with my mother, and it was absolutely terrible. But you did it. You told her the truth. I told her the truth, and the world didn't end. She didn't disown me. She didn't tell me I was ruining my life. Lena wiped at her eyes. She actually listened. For maybe the first time ever, she actually heard me. Progress is messy. Progress is exhausting. She leaned her head against the window. Can we go back to your apartment? I want to see Maya and eat normal food and not think about my family for at least 6 hours. They spent the afternoon in Ethan's small apartment, Maya delighted to have Lena back and determined to share every book, toy, and random fact she knew about dinosaurs. Lena listened with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested, asking questions and making connections and treating Maya like a person whose thoughts mattered. Watching them together, Ethan felt something settle in his chest. Not certainty exactly, but the possibility of it. The possibility that this fragile thing they were building could be real and lasting. That choosing honesty over performance might actually work. That maybe, despite all the logical reasons it shouldn't, they could build something that mattered. Victoria called that evening while they were making dinner, Maya helping by creating abstract art with pasta sauce on the kitchen counter. How much trouble am I in? Were Lena's first words. Zero trouble. I'm calling to thank you. Victoria's voice was clearer than Lena had heard it in months. Marcus and I spent all day yesterday, and most of today actually talking, really talking, about what we want, what we're afraid of, whether we're getting married because we love each other or because it's what everyone expects. And we decided to postpone indefinitely, maybe permanently. We need to figure out who we are separately before we try to figure out who we are together. Victoria laughed, watery but genuine. Mother is devastated. Father is in damage control mode, and I feel lighter than I've felt in years. I'm proud of you, Tori. I'm terrified, but also hopeful. Is that possible? To be both at the same time? I think that's the only honest way to feel. They talked for another 20 minutes, Victoria sharing her plans to take time off work and travel, to figure out what she actually wanted instead of what she'd been programmed to want. Marcus was apparently doing the same, questioning whether private equity was his calling or just the path of least resistance. The wedding that never happened had detonated both their lives in ways that might actually be necessary. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Tuesday and Friday afternoons still belonged to the bookstore cafe, though now they sat on the same side of the table instead of across from each other. Maya started joining them occasionally, bringing homework or library books, and existing in their space with the comfortable ease of someone who belonged. Lena's consulting work continued, but with new boundaries. No weekend calls, no midnight emails, no sacrificing her actual life for clients who saw her as a resource instead of a person. Catherine called once a week, awkward conversations that slowly became slightly less awkward as she learned to ask about Lena's life instead of managing it. Richard remained distant but sent a stilted email acknowledging that he respected Lena's autonomy, which was the closest he could come to approval. Victoria and Marcus were navigating their own separate journeys toward self-discovery, checking in periodically with updates that ranged from terrifying to exhilarating. One Saturday morning in April, Ethan woke to find Lena and Maya in the kitchen making pancakes, their collaboration resulting in something that was technically edible but aesthetically chaotic. Maya was covered in flour and explaining the dietary habits of Brachiosaurus, while Lena listened and flipped pancakes with the focused attention of someone who'd never cooked breakfast in her life, but was determined to learn. "Morning," Lena said when she saw him, her smile soft and genuine. "We made breakfast. It's not good, but it's enthusiastic." "Daddy, did you know that Brachiosaurus ate rocks to help digest their food?" "Lena didn't know that. I'm teaching her dinosaur facts." "That's very educational of you." They ate terrible pancakes and excellent company. The three of them squeezed around Ethan's small kitchen table in the morning light. It was ordinary and messy and completely imperfect, and Ethan realized this was what he'd been running toward all along. Not simplicity exactly, but authenticity. Not hiding from his past, but building a present that actually belonged to him. After breakfast, while Maya was occupied with cartoons, Lena pulled Ethan onto the small balcony that overlooked the hardware store parking lot. It wasn't scenic, but it was theirs, a space they'd claimed for quiet conversations and stolen moments. "I gave notice at my consulting firm yesterday," she said without preamble. "What? Why?" "Because I've been thinking about what I actually want to do with my life. And corporate strategy consulting isn't it. It never was. I was just good at it, and my parents approved of it, and it paid well enough to fund the lifestyle I thought I was supposed to want." She leaned against the railing. "I'm going to take some time off. Figure out what actually interests me instead of what I'm supposed to be interested in." "That's brave. That's terrifying. I have savings, but not forever, and no plan beyond not this anymore. But watching you build a life that actually belongs to you instead of performing someone else's definition of success, it made me want to try the same thing." "What does your mother think?" "She thinks I'm having some kind of crisis and will come to my senses eventually, but she's trying to be supportive in her very Catherine way, which mostly means sending me articles about women who took career breaks and lived to regret it." Lena smiled. "But she's trying. That's progress." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the morning traffic, the ordinary rhythms of a Sunday in a small town where nobody cared who Reedvale used to be or what Catherine Harrington thought about anything. "I love you," Ethan said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. "I know it's too soon and too complicated, and there are 1,000 logical reasons I shouldn't say that yet, but it's true. I love you." Lena turned to face him, her eyes bright. "It's not too soon. Or maybe it is, but I don't care about timelines anymore. I love you too. I love that you chose your daughter over your empire. I love that you make terrible coffee and edit manuscripts that will never be bestsellers and look at me like I'm already enough exactly as I am. You are enough. I'm starting to believe that." Inside, Maya called for them, some urgent 7-year-old crisis involving her favorite dinosaur toy and immediate need for adult intervention. They went to her together, and Ethan thought about how his life had become something he never could have planned or strategized his way toward. He'd given up Reed Vale to be present for Maya, and in the process of being present, he'd found Lena. And Lena had given up her performance of success to find herself, and in the process found them. It wasn't a neat story. There was no dramatic reconciliation with Catherine, no moment when Richard suddenly understood and approved. Victoria and Marcus remained separated but hopeful, both of them doing the hard work of figuring out who they were apart from expectations. The Harrington family remained complicated and difficult and probably always would be. But Ethan had learned that messy, complicated, and imperfect could also be real and honest and worth fighting for. That walking away from a life that looked impressive could lead you toward a life that actually felt meaningful. That being seen for who you actually were was worth more than being admired for who you pretended to be. 3 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in July, Ethan and Lena sat at their usual table in the bookstore cafe. Maya was at summer camp learning about marine biology with the same intensity she'd once applied to dinosaurs. The cafe's espresso machine still hissed like an angry cat every fourth drink. The lighting was still warm enough to read by, but dim enough to disappear into. "I've been thinking," Lena said, setting down her unnecessarily complicated vanilla coffee, "about going back to school. Getting a degree in something completely impractical like anthropology or literature, something that interests me instead of something that impresses people." "That sounds perfect." "It sounds expensive and self-indulgent, and exactly the kind of thing my mother would have a very polite stroke about." And I'm going to do it anyway." She smiled. "I'm learning that living a life that actually belongs to me is more important than living a life that looks good to other people. Took me 40 years to learn that lesson. Better late than never? Much better late than never." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other on purpose. Outside, the world continued its usual chaos of ambition and performance, and people measuring their worth in zeros and titles. But inside the bookstore cafe on Maple Street, Ethan Cole and Lena Harrington had found something more valuable than any deal either of them had ever closed. They'd found the courage to be honestly, imperfectly, completely themselves. And that was worth more than all of Reed Vale's legendary success combined. Maya came home from camp that evening talking nonstop about tide pools and hermit crabs and whether she could have an aquarium in her room. Lena stayed for dinner, helping make spaghetti that was slightly burned but entirely sufficient. They ate together at the small kitchen table, the three of them, a family that hadn't existed 6 months ago but felt as real and solid as anything Ethan had ever built. After Maya was asleep, Lena curled up beside him on the couch, her head on his shoulder, both of them tired and content in the way of people who'd fought hard for something and won. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "Reed Vale? The power, the influence, the feeling of being important?" "Sometimes. Usually when I'm editing a manuscript about vampire detectives for the 17th time and wondering if my skills are being wasted." He kissed the top of her head. "But then Maya comes home with a perfect score on her math test and wants to tell me about every single problem. Or you show up at the cafe with some disaster from your family that we can laugh about together. And I remember that Reed Vale was important to strangers, but Ethan Cole matters to the people who actually know him. I think Ethan Cole is pretty remarkable. I think Lena Harrington is finally becoming who she was always meant to be. Works in progress? The best kind of people always are." They sat there until late, talking and not talking, being together in the way that only worked when you weren't performing for anyone. And Ethan thought about the bookstore cafe where this all began, about the wedding that never happened, about the moment Marcus Castellanos called him Reed Vale in front of 200 people and everything changed. But really, everything had changed months before that. Changed the moment Lena asked if the seat was taken and Ethan said yes without knowing he was saying yes to so much more than sharing a table. Changed every Tuesday and Friday when they chose honesty over performance, authenticity over impression, connection over convenience. The Reed Vale story had ended in dissolution and disappearance. A legend who walked away at the height of success for reasons no one quite understood. But the Ethan Cole story was just beginning, written in quiet afternoons and burned spaghetti dinners and 7-year-old questions about the universe. Written in a woman who'd chosen herself over her family's expectations and found that choosing yourself sometimes meant finding exactly who you were meant to be with. It wasn't the story either of them had planned, but it was real and honest and entirely their own. And in a world that rewarded performance over authenticity, that felt like revolution.